Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
What's your claim to fame in Dayton, if you have one? And just introduce yourself.
My claim to fame, my name is Alex Green. I am currently the marketing director at Simply Bank. I, in 90 days, will be the executive director at Rhea Economic and Tourism Council. I am a lifelong Rhea County native. That's redundant, I think, to say lifelong native, but I've lived out of Rhea County for 3.5 years. When my wife and I got married, we lived in Hickson, and we moved back here.
We didn't live in the area for 3 years. We lived in Hickson.
We changed zip codes. We lived in 2 apartments in that time in the same complex. So, yeah, that's the extent of my moving. We came back. We bought a house in 2018 on Bryan Drive, which is where you and I met.
Mm-hmm. At Bryan College.
At Bryan College, yeah. So, I don't have a claim to fame other than I'm a Green. So most people would say that my granddad was Hiram Green. And so that's probably that's my claim to fame. So if you go down Highway 27 South, you'll see Hiram Green Memorial Highway. That's named after him. He was kind of a political hawk and just kind of a mover, a guy who got things done.
What do you mean by political hawk?
Well, he was involved. He was a very diehard Republican, and he loved politics. He loved local politics, and he loved having a voice in the process. And he really believed in the idea of public service. He was a private businessman his whole life, funny enough. But he loved politics. He loved service. Also, near Dayton City School, there's a softball field, and it's called Green Field. That's named after him because he loved youth sports.
Is that the clover pattern, the 4 fields?
Yes. One of the Jim Barnes complex.
Okay, yeah.
That's my claim to fame, man. And
Nice.
I know justice. Yeah, I'm a friend of justice. That's my other claim to fame.
Yeah. And your family, I didn't know your grandpa, but I do know your parents from the Ace Hardware store.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's also a thing.
They
right?
are the helpful hardware folks.
Yes.
I grew up in South Dayton. My mom and dad are phenomenal people. They raised my sister and me well, I guess. It turned out okay. But yeah, they run Ace Hardware up on the north end of town. They've been there for a long time. My dad was in construction his whole life. That's what my granddad did. He ran a construction company. I wanted more than anything to be in the construction business. I wanted to build houses. I love watching a piece of dirt become a house.
Yeah.
It's an amazing thing to me.
It's cool.
And I used to go to work in the summers with my dad doing construction, and I realized pretty quickly that I was really not good at it. And so, I appreciate that kind of work because if you have not done it, it is really difficult.
I want to jump right into the position that you'll be stepping into soon, and then we'll back up and kind of get more of your story and everything like that. But for like the 4th time, what's the name of the position?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah. No, that's okay. This is a common question. So I will be the executive director of the Rhea Economic and Tourism Council. Also,
RETC.
RETC also does some business under the brand Rhea Economic Community Development. So economic community development is kind of the nomenclature that the state uses. So like there's Tennessee ECD, Economic Community Development. So that's kind of the nomenclature that a lot of economic development offices go by. RETC is the official 501c3, I think it's an in-corp name of the business. But you may see Rhea ECD as well.
Gotcha. Yep. So it's a nonprofit. It's not the government.
Correct. It is not the government. That's a kind of a misconception. RETC stands alone from the government. It does receive government funds because it performs tasks and holds responsibilities to aid municipalities in economic development, but it is not a government entity. I am not an elected official. A board made up of elected officials and private business people appoint positions at economic community development. That board has appointed me to be the next executive director in Rhea County beginning May 13th.
That's very exciting.
Yeah,
Congratulations, man.
Yeah, thanks, man.
That's a big deal.
Thanks, man.
So I've known Alex for a long time, and I've just seen different career paths, like, and we'll probably get into some stories later on, but I remember hiding in the Bimbo's restaurant, hiding from camera crews.
I remember that
during the Bryan College.
You fed me
Triangle
several
days.
times.
Yep, spaghetti.
Yeah, hollandaise sauce was first time I ever had hollandaise sauce. Was at the Brick House.
Yeah,
good times.
We got chops. So it's been cool to watch. From there, your career develop.
Yeah, thanks, man.
You've always been willing to jump into an arena and figure it out and do a good job.
Thanks.
So it's kind of funny. We were talking about it before the camera was rolling, being at a place where in your early 30s, suddenly our peers are getting positions that are notable and have, leadership in our local community. So there's a little bit of a surprise, like a shock that comes. It's like, this is the kind of position my dad should have, not my buddy from college. And, but we're getting to that age, and it's really cool to see, a lot of Dayton leadership is older, and there's a lot of wisdom that comes with age. But it's really cool to see, along with those wise leaders, young leaders stepping in, being hired by these old leaders, and the camaraderie that's immediately, seemingly there. Would you say that's the case in your experience?
Yeah, I do think so. Dayton has been really fortunate. So Dayton, growing up in Dayton, I tell people all the time, it's a quirky town. There's a gravity here that exists in a way that, and I'm biased because I grew up here, but I've seen people come here, mean to leave, and then they just don't. And these stories are all over the place. And you and Anna Cat are
We're an example of
like
that, yeah.
John Warner. I was at Art Crafters a few months ago, and the folks who run that, they're from Minnesota. And so a lot of that's Bryan College. John Carpenter, great mutual friend. He's a guy who came here for school, meant to leave, never did. So there's a gravity in this community, and it's real, and it's unique and special. And I think that's a cool trait to the town, and it's been able to, I think, attract really high quality leadership, probably punching above our weight in terms of population and size, and we have an embarrassment of riches in terms of talent for a town of our size. So all that long answer, but yeah, I do think that that has always been the case. And it's weird. Like I was telling you, I think of the executive director of RETC is John Bambert's Dennis. It's the guys that I've always looked up to. It's a job held by someone with authority and credibility, and it's extremely surreal.
Now look.
Yeah, for me. Well, and I just feel like, they have no idea what they've done. They have no idea what they've done.
They don't know.
How did I slip through the cracks this far? But you're right. You have obviously Caleb's on the city council. Jace is, our elected judge. It's just really interesting. And you said it, and it's interesting how there's not like a bellwether moment in which suddenly there are new people holding some of these positions. It's a gradual process. And I would say that's a really encouraging thing. Yeah. It means that our parents, our grandparents, raised us correctly, and they instilled a love for the community. They instilled a sense of duty, so that when you see a need, you step up to fill that need. Which is that's what I'm doing, and I know some of these other folks, and I see that across the board, and that's really cool.
So let's talk about this position as director of RETC. What are its responsibilities? What are its duties? What's the goal? What have prior people accomplished that maybe that might bring it home for people who are listening, because you can explain hypothetically the duties, but it's do you see this? This happened because of this position, stuff like that.
Yeah, so I have not started. So I start in about 90 days. So it's really interesting because I get to, I'm going to tell you what I think it is. And every job I've ever had, I there was what I thought it was going to be.
And then what it was.
And then I got there, and then there was what it was. So on paper, the job is holding responsibility for guiding and aiding economic and tourism growth in the community. So that's Rhea County from, Roddy to Graysville. That's from the plateau, Dayton Mountain on the west, to the river on the east. It's not Dayton. It's everyone.
Greater Dayton.
It's
or is
everything.
it the whole entire county?
It's Rhea County.
Yeah, Rhea County.
It's
so
Rhea County.
All the way.
Yep.
How far?
Roane County.
All the way to the border of Roane County.
Yep.
Almost to Rockwood, basically.
I think it's, I don't want to get this wrong. I think it's White's Creek up there.
Okay.
So all the way to the creek. So there's a spot. If you drive all the way north, you'll cross the creek, and it's where there's a Boy Scout memorial. And it's where many years ago a Boy Scout encampment was down in the creek. They were on a weekend. I think it was a weekend, and a flash flood came. Incredibly tragic accident, and so that's where the memorial is. But anyway, that's the boundary.
That's
so it goes
line.
all the way to Roane County to Hamilton County. So the job is aiding the municipalities and helping to guide economic and community development. That's a lot of jargon. What does that actually mean, right? So that means jobs are a big part of that. So making sure that we are planning ahead and that we're bringing good quality, high-paying jobs to this community, that we are proactively finding corporate citizens and then selling them on what we have because they have options. They can build their factory anywhere in the United States. So it's our job to make sure that they build it here. And so we go and we talk to them and we say, listen, Rhea County is the best place in the world. You should build that factory here. We have rail, we have road, we have flat industrial land, we have employee IQ, we have a high school with a phenomenal career and technical program. We have everything you need, and the state of Tennessee is extremely business friendly. And so there's a lot of help from Nashville, making sure, because Nashville wants those businesses to stay in Tennessee and not go to Alabama or Georgia or North Carolina, whatever. So yeah, within the state. And so it's RETC's job as a nonprofit to take funding from the municipalities and then to ask them, what do you need? What can we help with? But then also to go to Nashville and to come back to the municipalities and say, here's what Nashville wants done. Here's what the current administration is looking for. Here are grants. So here's money from the state that they're trying to spend. They just need to know whether we have projects that fulfill these needs or not. That's an RETC function.
Okay.
And so that's why it's so important that the office exists and that it is in constant kind of communication between Nashville and your local municipalities, and that you're finding out, how to get funding for the things that we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Long answer.
No. Yeah, that's great. So, what kind of carrot do you have in a position that you will be in to woo businesses in? Like, what are you able to? What's your leverage? What kind of?
Yeah. So I do want to answer. So another part of the question that you asked, No Key and Tires is a good example. Like Fish Dayton, fishing tournaments, those are all examples of RETC functions.
So Fish Dayton and No Key and Tires is a result of like explicit efforts on the part of
RETC. Yep. Dennis Tumlin and John Bamber. So both guys who have held this position in the past and who did phenomenal work. Work that the general public will never fully see and appreciate, but you talk about guys who they went the extra mile, and a lot of that work again may not be visible, but it has made this a better place to live and to raise families. So those are explicit RETC outcomes. And then you asked about the carrot. So what incentives? How? So why would you come here? When I'm sitting across the table,
right?
So certainly there's the option to work with the state on tax incentive programs. I don't want to get too far into that because I'm not I'm not in
you
that
haven't
position.
even taken the position
Yeah.
yet.
So,
I
and
understand.
that's a controversial thing to talk about for good reason.
Tax incentives.
Yeah. Because you shouldn't just give money away.
Right.
It's our responsibility to make sure that our resources are used well and correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes that is a very good tool, and it is an appropriate tool in the right case.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a tool to be used wisely. And we have always used it wisely in this community. It's really interesting. I was a reporter, as you know, at the Times Free Press, right out of school, and I covered business for a long time, about 3 years. And I was able to go out and talk to all these different kinds of businesses. And I was talking, so Fort Payne, Alabama. I don't know if you're familiar with Fort Payne.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Fort Payne used to be the sock capital of the world. They made all the major sock kind of textile manufacturers had a presence in Fort Payne. Then in the early 90s, Congress and the Clinton administration passed NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and suddenly it became cheaper to make socks in Honduras or overseas, and it was cheaper to make them there and then ship them here and sell them. Mm-hmm. And so what happened? Well, go to Fort Payne today, and you will find a lot of empty buildings, a lot of empty factories. And so in Fort Payne, I remember talking to the mayor at that point. I was interviewing him, and I was asking him, why has it been a challenge to fill some of these buildings? Why has it been hard to, see the kind of economic growth in this part of the state? And he was saying, well, in factories they would come to Tennessee, and they would not go to northern Alabama, even though they share a border.
It's right there.
It's right there. There are spots that you would go, this doesn't, in some ways, it may have made sense. Well, it's because the state of Tennessee has been more aggressive and it has a more business-friendly environment.
As far as tax rates or?
Yeah, tax incentive packaging, and then, empowering local communities to offer some sort of incentive and to dangle the carrot in front of these businesses. And at that point, this guy, he expressed real frustration about that. He said, man, Tennessee is killing us. He said, your guys' state government gets this better than at that point in time their state government did. But also it was really interesting that Alabama historically, stop me, I'm on a soapbox, but
no, you're good.
Historically, if you look at it, the southern part of Alabama is flat, rich soil, great for agriculture. So, in the antebellum period, that's where all of the farming was, which meant that's where all of the money was, which meant that's where all the power was. Northern Alabama was more of your hilly Appalachian region. It didn't have influence in Montgomery. Mm-hmm. And so all of the, and he would argue, some folks in Northern Alabama would still argue that the state prioritizes Southern Alabama, and so it funnels more money and resources to the southern part of the state simply because there's this historical kind of power dynamic. All that to say, Tennessee has done, if you look at surrounding states, Tennessee has done a phenomenal job. Our state government really understood early on what it took to win business, and has put legs on that and has empowered local communities. The fact that we have Nokian tires in Ray County, that's massive.
Yeah.
You look at all the gun manufacturers who have left New England and come to Tennessee. It's because our state government is business friendly, and it has made a point to bring those people here. And when they come here, they bring jobs. They bring high-paying jobs that wouldn't exist otherwise.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I want to explain why I'm having you on before you start this job, because it might feel a little bit like jumping the gun to be talking to you already because you don't even start it in 90 days. 90 days.
Yep. Unless they see this and say, no thanks.
Wait, is that the guy? Get him out of here. But I think it's for a position that I would, this is definitely in the category of a public servant. I would love to, I'm actually really eager to get your thoughts before going into it, so that maybe we can loop back around after a year or however long and be like, hey, what were your we heard your expectations or your vision. Like, how is that fleshed out? What were the surprises?
Yep.
What are the challenges? Stuff like that. So going into the position, I just want to get your personal vision. So we understand now kind of what the position does.
Yep.
I'd like to get what the Alex Green take is for what you hope to accomplish.
Okay.
In part because you're my friend and I want to know it, but also in part because as a position of public service, I'd like for everyone who watches this to be like, we know what what Alex wanted to do. Can we hold him to it a little bit? Not
or fail.
too bad.
Pass or fail.
Yeah, thumbs up, thumbs down.
So, first grade report card.
Exactly.
Pass or fail. No, that's a great question. And so I told you, I really do believe I was a journalist, right? So I was a journalist by education. I was a newspaper reporter. I believe in transparency. I believe our system of government has worked so well for so long because people are entitled to know what's happening. People are entitled to know, how resources are being used. So I welcome the question. Today, 90 days out.
A year from now, Justice wants to do another podcast.
Ask me again in 18 months.
Right.
So that's a great question. I would say that my personal vision for this community is it's really simple, but it's planned growth. So you're going to grow, right? That's the nature of existence. We already were seeing a migration to the southeast from other parts of the country. People were moving here already from New England, from the Midwest, the Rust Belt, from the out west in California. People were already doing that. Then when the pandemic kind of brought life to a halt, suddenly people in stricter parts of the country said, this is not great. We don't like this. Probably one of the biggest transformational things that happened in our lifetimes, and I believe this, will be the shift of work from in-person to remote. And that's largely thanks to the pandemic, because suddenly you had companies in California who had 500 employees, and those 500 employees used to have to get up and commute to an office every day. Well, then during the pandemic, they told those people, please do not come to the office. Then when kind of the threat of spread was over, they said, actually, this is better. Mm-hmm. So I tell you what, Justice, despite the fact you work at Facebook and our headquarters is in, Cupertino, wherever it is, you don't really have to be here anymore. So you could really go live wherever you want to live. And people making Facebook salaries, California salaries, they said, well, Nashville sounds nice. And so they looked at Nashville and they said, oh, actually, that's a little bit more of the same in terms of traffic, in terms of, whatever, not in terms of laws, but just in terms of some of the things they're trying to escape. And so they started to draw wider circles around Nashville. Yeah. And then they looked at Chattanooga and they drew wider circles. And what happens is people started finding places like Dayton, like Rhea County, and they started moving here. And that's a good thing. That's an enriching thing. Like America has worked so well, again, transparency, but also like the immigration model. Like we are traditionally, we're not a country, we're not a homogenous population. Like the brilliance of it is that we brought the best people from everywhere else here. And
in this case, you're talking about interstate, between states.
Correct.
Like we freedom of movement. You can move. It's as easy as getting a U-Haul.
And it can be a microcosm in my mind of like what has made America great for so long.
On a global scale, yeah.
Yeah, it's like we can bring the very best and smartest people here, and they'll live right here in our community. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
However, you do have to make sure that you plan for that. You have to make sure that you have your future casting, because otherwise, we at Simply Bank, where I've been fortunate to be for the past 4.5 years, roughly, we went through a culture program. And one of the lasting things that I took away from that was that you have a culture by default or you have a culture by design. Mm-hmm. So if you do nothing and you just show up every day and you do your jobs and there's no intention put into creating a culture, you will have a culture. It just may not be
accidental.
Yeah, and it may not be the one that you want.
Right.
But if you make a plan and you say, this is who we want to be, and you create a litmus for every decision, you create a litmus for hiring, you create a litmus for growth strategy, all of that fits into your plan, and now you have something by design.
Right.
And so, like, I see community development, economic development the same way. We have to have a design, or else we wind up with something on accident. And historically, no one really likes that.
Right.
When you wind up with something by default, you look at downtown Chattanooga. To me, is a great example of it. It was a city that wound up in a place by default. So in the 70s, I think it was the famous Walter Cronkite bit of Chattanooga is the dirtiest city in America, and you had flight out of downtown. So in the post-war period, because people used to live downtown. Downtowns existed because people lived there, and when people lived there, restaurants opened, services opened. People would wake up in a building. They would walk down. They get on the sidewalk. They take a trolley or whatever. And then in the 50s, the automobile and the Eisenhower Interstate Plan and all this stuff changed the way people lived and worked. And so now you have these. That's the reason so many suburban developments are mid-century. It's because they were built in the 50s because the automobile made it so that people could leave the city and they would live 20 miles away, and then they would drive into downtown to work. Well, when you have a downtown population that commutes in 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, you suddenly have restaurants that can't survive because there's no one there to eat dinner. You have services which are picking up, and they're going where the people are. So services go where people live, right? And so Chattanooga in the 70s looks around and they go, oh no, everyone left, right? Everyone who could afford to left, and that's a different problem, right? Yeah. Everyone who could afford to left, and again, that's a whole different problem. So then you had in the 90s this very intentional revitalization project where Chattanooga's leaders, nonprofit, and public-private groups said we have to fix this. Our downtown is broken. It's dirty. People don't want to come here. People don't want to shop here. People don't want to drive through here, right? 153 is a bypass.
It definitely has.
It has worked.
It continues to be on top lists of places to live, small cities to live in the United States.
And not that we want to be Chattanooga, but what I'm saying is imagine, so here's where I think we are in some ways. Ray County is growing at a fast clip. People have figured out what we have here. People have figured out that it's a great place to live. Imagine you could go back in time, knowing what we know now, to Chattanooga in the 1950s. If you could go back in time, you would tell them, hey, don't do this. If you do this, you're going to create a lot of problems. You're going to create traffic. You're going to create infrastructure issues. You need to invest. You need to create a plan for what you want this town to be. Otherwise, you're going to go through 50 years in the desert,
right,
wandering around trying to find yourself. I think we are positioned kind of at that point where we get to say, we have the benefit of history and say, well, we're growing. We need to make really sure that we're growing the way we want to grow and that we're becoming the kind of community that we want to become rather than the kind of community that happens by default.
By accident or default. So I'm sold on intentionality. What does that design look like in your mind? Like, what are you for? What are you against? Like, what kind of Dayton do you imagine in the future? Like, if you're, okay, so you want to not do it by default, you want to do it by design. What does the Alex Green version of that design, if you had your druthers, what would that look like? Does that mean lean into like another Nokian or like more fishing, or is it like a pivot? Do you want to, hey, we've got enough of that, let's look at something different? I'm not even saying there's a right or wrong answer. Like
sure.
Practically speaking, what are you looking at? Again, this is before your position, so we'll all give you grace for not being in the job, but to hold you accountable to an initial, like, this is the direction we want to do this. Like, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the direction that you'd like to go if you could?
Yeah, no, I love the question. So I see a future in which, so I have a little, we both have girls. I have one. She's 4.5. I envision a future in which she can stay in Ray County and get a good, high-paying, professional job and have a career without having to go to Knoxville, Chattanooga, or Nashville or Atlanta. Mm-hmm. So, what does that look like?
So more white collar jobs versus blue collar jobs?
Not necessarily, because I think, talk about another. I think the nature of education is changing before our eyes.
Right, and there's a whole crossfade happening there.
Yeah, so I think the nature of what a person needs to be successful, because we grew up in the time where we were told if you don't go to a 4-year college, you will never be able to make a living. Mm-hmm. Well, that was patently false. Mm-hmm. I know people who are in the electrical and plumbing fields, construction fields, who are making more than I will ever make, and good for them.
Yeah,
because that's hard work and they're experts. So, not necessarily. I think blue collar work, but certainly white collar as well. Like what about coding? What about coding jobs? What about technology jobs? Like, what does that look like in a town like this when you don't have to be in Silicon Valley anymore? Mm-hmm. Why not? Why not? Why would you not build that here? Why would I not base that company here, knowing that I can hire people? I could have employees in Arizona. I could have employees in Michigan. I could have employees in Maine. So I would love to see my vision. I would love to see high-paying jobs that will be high-paying jobs in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. I think technology is a big piece of that. Obviously, artificial intelligence is in its infancy. What does that look like? I don't know. Manufacturing, people will always need stuff. People, whether the cars are electric or internal combustion, they're going to need tires. So that's a great investment, right? People will always want to sit on couches and love seats and recliners. So Lazy Boy, that's a great investment for our community. I think thinking through what that looks like, and manufacturing, but the kind of manufacturing that we want. Nokian and Lazy Boy are very clean. They're extremely considerate corporate citizens. They're involved. They give back. They make an effort to be good neighbors. Those are the kinds of people we want. We are not interested in people who may come and invest a lot of money, but they're not nice to live next to. But they don't care about the environment. They don't care about the natural resources that we have here. We're not interested in recruiting those kinds of folks, because we have to maintain the good things that we have here, and we've done a phenomenal job at that. If you look at our corporate resident base. And so I would say look at what we've done, and we need more of those.
Just more of the same.
We need more Lazy Boys. We need more Nokians. We need Robinson. We need more Robinsons, the 100-year-old company. That's incredible.
That is cool.
So
and locally based too.
Locally based. And then the last thing I would say is entrepreneurship. I would love to see more people from this community starting businesses. I don't know if the Robinsons thought in 100 years that they would still be running a dominant workforce in this community, but whether they thought it or not, they did it.
Yeah.
And where are those companies today?
Right. Which ones are getting started? One of the next stories. 10 years.
Yeah. One of the stories I really wanted to write at the Times Free Press, and I didn't get a chance to, because I looked around. You look around, and we always talk about these legacy companies, the McKees in Chattanooga, Chattanooga Bakery, and here we have, Lazy Boy, we have Nokian. Robinson's a great example. Who's doing that? Who's starting companies today that will be here in 100 years? Who has an idea today to make a thing, or to create a manufacturing process, or to write code, or to manipulate artificial intelligence, whatever that thing, make bicycles, I don't know, whatever that thing is. Where are those people today? And it's a little bit worrying when you look around, because 100 years ago, all of these companies were springing up manufacturing stuff. And today, that's
a little less so.
It's a little less so. And like that need is not going to go away. So where are those people? Because I know they exist.
Right.
So where are they? And like, how can we help them? How can we help them do that here?
So you're almost certainly going to have detractors. From what I can tell, talking to people on the podcast. What? Say that? No, surely. From what I can tell, there seem to be the two groups that tend to have friction are the people who want more businesses, new businesses, and the people who are concerned that more growth and change will turn Dayton into something different. And they love Dayton for what it is, which is totally understandable.
Yeah,
and
right.
honestly, to some degree, I feel like I have a foot in both camps, to be honest, because I came to Dayton for what it was, not for what it could be.
Yep.
You know, I fell in love with Dayton as is.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so it's like, okay, hold on, slow down. What are we doing here? So you'll certainly, and the nature of your job is development. Like you can't get away from that, frankly.
The job is not stop economic and community development.
Your job is not to hit the brakes. Like you're
that's
necessarily going to hit the gas. So
I will be fired so fast if that happens. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Nothing. No development.
Alex, what have you done? I've done nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
It's George Costanza. You know? I'm just walking around with a folder, you know. No, you're right. You're right.
So how do you balance that, especially being from here?
Yep.
You know those people.
Yeah. Sometimes I am those people.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe you are that person
Sometimes
on some days, on Wednesdays and Fridays. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't.
When I can't go to Carabelle's on Friday, I am those people.
Yeah. So how do you navigate that and make sure that Dayton becomes what it's supposed to be, or maintains the goodness that it's always had that makes us love it in the first place, something like that.
Yep.
And maybe to throw this in there, I'm asking a lot of questions.
Yep.
What is that about Dayton that that can't change, that should not change ever?
Yep. Culture is, I think what you're talking about is culture, first of all. That's the thing. That's the thing. And I think we are a really interesting case study of a place that has a culture by design, but maybe didn't know it. And the design was people like my granddad, who had a private business and he was successful, but he also gave a lot of time to service. He gave a lot of time to politics. He gave a lot of time to youth sports. We have Hurley, Jim, and the mayors of Dayton and Ray County. We have Mayor Woody up in Spring City, and then Charles in Graysville. They all have demonstrated this. Whether it was by design or not, they've been doing it. They're servants, and they've given back, and they've shown, rather than told in a lot of cases, that this is how you run a good community. This is what it takes to be the kind of place we want to be. So that, I think, is the key, is that we continue to demonstrate, the idea that my youth pastor of mine, Adam, he'll watch this probably. He used to always say, to those whom much is given, much is required. And that's true. And that's as true today as it was 100 years ago. So how do we grow? How do we develop and maintain that? First of all, I would say it's important to recognize everyone has the right to voice their opinion. Everyone has a right to feel the way they feel. So if you are someone who thinks, I do not want this community to grow and change, that's a legitimate opinion that you can have, So I do not ever want to be guilty of saying that there's a right way to think about it and a wrong way to think about it, because the fact that you live here means that you have the right to have that thought. I would argue, however, there is no option in which growth doesn't happen. And if you think that you don't want growth, I think maybe you think that you don't want growth, right? Because we were talking.
I was just about to say that's like, if you think you don't want growth, you should go to South Pittsburgh, which I'm not trying to.
Lovely town, by the way.
Not trying to throw shade.
I love South Pittsburgh, the Princess Theater, wonderful place.
I was just there, and I love the town.
Yep.
And it is obviously struggling with figuring out how to grow. So
Yep.
I looked up the census.
Mm-hmm.
There was a piece of property I was looking at
Mm-hmm.
there in South Pittsburgh. Beautiful piece of property. It was an old brick building downtown. The census peaked. Their population peaked in 65 and would drop by an average of 5% every census until recently in 2020. And it went up 3%, which is a great sign. Good for South Pittsburgh.
Sure.
But when you drive around, you realize the impact that having a robust economy, local economy, can have, not just for the business people, but for the felt life of the city.
100%.
Like, can you support restaurants that you want to eat at? Can you support parks that you want your kids to play at? You know what I mean? Can you support a street of houses that look nice that you want to live next to? You know what I mean? And it's a really, and I really do hope the best for South Pittsburgh. They've got so much going for them. Man. They're on the river. They're in Tennessee, so that whole Alabama versus Tennessee thing. So they've got that. They've got Lodge, which is a great corporation.
Absolutely.
So they've got a ton of ingredients. And that bounce in population might be a sign of what's coming for them, which is super exciting. But you can see the challenge that's ahead for them. And I don't think that most people who say, who are worried about growth would want to necessarily trade places. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think there's no one who wants their quality of life to be worse, right? So, however, I do understand. I think that's a statement made out of concern, and a lot of times made out of fear of what it's going to cost.
So, what is the cost? What is the fear of the cost?
Well, I think the fear of the cost is that we turn into a place that we don't recognize anymore, or that we turn into a place that has lost the the feeling that you have in this town, that you lose. There's something enchanting about Ray County and that's Spring City, that's Graysville, that's Dayton, that's the unincorporated communities. A lot of it is people, frankly. It's an extremely friendly place. People genuinely care about one another and look out for one another. But also, to circle back to kind of the top of the conversation, we have enjoyed an embarrassment of talent in this community for a long time. So going back 100 years, I think we had, literally going back 100 years, because the Scopes trial, a group of businessmen sat around.
Next year.
Right. Will be
Next
the
year will be a
centennial.
Yeah.
So going back 100 years, those guys, they were sitting around and they said, our businesses are struggling. We're not generating the type of income, the revenue that we need to generate. We need to get people to come to Dayton. How do we do that? And
world famous trial.
They concocted a world famous court trial, and they succeeded. So again, like, that doesn't happen in small towns. Like, I can't stress to people enough how unique and wonderful and quirky this place is. People don't think like that.
Right.
That you cannot imagine that happening in Atlanta. Right? You can't imagine that happening in Sacramento. That's in a small town. So a previous job I used to have to go to, a previous job I had, I used to have to go to this, to Texarkana, Arkansas several times a year. Texarkana is a really interesting place. It's right on the Texas-Arkansas line. One day, so I love history, you know this, and I've always read about the Red River. I've always wanted to see the Red River in person. So Texarkana is like pretty close to the Oklahoma line. I've never been to Oklahoma, so I said one day after work to my buddies who were with me, I was like, hey, let's go, let's just drive to Oklahoma. It's right there, So we got in our car, and we drove. We crossed the Red River, so I could check that off my box, and it was dinner time, so we said, let's find the closest town and go have dinner. And we wound up in a town called Idabel, Oklahoma. Idabel. Great name.
I love that.
Idabel, Oklahoma. So we rolled into Idabel, Oklahoma. it was like a movie set, this place.
Yeah.
But it was, it was the skeleton of a town that had once been prosperous. So you could see that this place once had really been booming. And now there was I think there was one restaurant in town, and it was phenomenal. We ate there, phenomenal food, super friendly people. But when we're talking about growth and growth mindset, the opposite of that in my mind is this wonderful little town. I don't want to disparage it, but I think about Idabel, Oklahoma, and I do not want my little girl's kids to look around someday
and be like, we got to get out of here.
Right, because what am I going to do here?
Yeah.
You could play baseball in the town square at 5:00 in the afternoon. So to answer your question, yes, I do think concern about growth is legitimate, and I think that's a sign that we have people here who care about our community, and that's a wonderful thing. I share that concern. Having grown up in Dayton over the last 33 years, there are things that even now I look back on and I go, in some ways that thing was better then. Traffic today is worse than it was 20 years ago. I can say that. That's not a hot take, right? Anyone who's been here, you've seen this. And when did you come to Bryan?
08.
So since 08, oh my God, yeah, since 08, you've seen this. So traffic is worse than it used to be. Worse in terms of it takes longer to get from one end of town to the other. That's a legitimate concern. When you see development, I think it's important that we develop responsibly and that we develop in a way that in 50 years or 100 years, people are not looking back and asking what we were thinking.
Yeah, why did you... Well, then let me ask you this. So you... What would you say no to? What do you think is not a good direction?
You're going to pin me down on this.
Oh, no.
What would I say?
You also don't have to answer.
What would I say no to?
Not even necessarily... Like if this is... It's hard to say specifically what the right direction is. Maybe more businesses like Monkey and stuff like that. It's hard to paint a clear picture.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if, just for the sake of us understanding the direction, we know Dayton isn't this.
Yep.
I don't know if that's helpful. I'm just trying to get a clearer picture.
I would say no to growth that makes the quality of life worse for people who live here. I think that's an easy kind of bar. You go, does this make life worse? Yeah. And if it does, we probably shouldn't do that.
Just pass. Yeah.
Does this cost us more than we're going to make? Then we shouldn't do it.
Meaning, as far as tax incentives, we do all these incentives and then we don't even
Like if it's costing taxpayers more than taxpayers yield, we shouldn't do that. Yeah. Right. That's basic math. And so. So tourism is obviously, that's a huge part of this equation. And I look at tourism and I go, what that is, in some ways, that's the golden goose, right? Because you get people from outside to come here, spend their money, and go home. Yeah. And so then we get to keep those dollars and we get to invest them in infrastructure and resources for residents.
Yeah. Let me do a quick round here.
Okay.
Tourism. What do you think, from a tourist perspective, are the top draws, either potentially or in reality today, of Rhea County? Maybe 3 or 4, or as many as you can think of. Just rattle them off. The
courthouse, the Rhea County Courthouse, and the Scopes Museum. I think those are
historic,
by and large, number one.
Yeah. Okay.
Probably natural resources. So I think hiking. I think that's high on that list. So if we're going to do natural resources, we'll say hiking and fishing. So obviously, we have spent a lot of time and effort becoming a fishing destination. Yeah. And that has largely worked.
Seems like it's gone well.
Yeah, right. So I would say natural resources are high on that list. And then I think there's another kind of section of potential. So you have, kinetic energy, which is what I would put all those in. Then you have your potential energies. To me, the potentials, so this is the exciting stuff. Because, again, I think a lot of that stuff is already working, right? So, you don't fix something that isn't broken. A lot of that's already working. I know there will be feedback about, the like fishing. That's just such a hot topic. And as someone who lives, well, people, I think there's a.
Are there pros and cons or something? I actually am not aware. Like, are there people against fishing?
Yeah, I think there's a widely kind of polarized position. I think it's very positive or it's very negative. And I think both sides have some legitimacy. And that's a case where I say it's important that we look at the data and we make business decisions. And we say, does the data support X, Y, and Z? And if so, then it's important that we show people, how does this impact your life, right? Because if you go to the gym every single day and you don't lose weight and you don't feel like you look any better, you're not going to keep going to the gym. So if there's a pain point that you feel like you're living with and you don't really see a tangible benefit to that, you are at some point going to lose patience, and you are at some point going to say, why are we doing this? So I think it's important that we look at that and we go, here is the benefit. And if there's going to be, if we're going to ask for a sacrifice, then we need to be able to understand what is that benefit, and then to tell you what that is.
Yeah.
So
potential energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you look, 25 minutes, 30 minutes north of Spring City, a development is happening. I think it's technically in Cumberland County. It's called Flat Rock Motorsports Park. And it is I think it's an FIA. So if you follow motorsports, the FIA is the International Motorsport Governing Authority. And they have built, I think it's an FIA Grade 2 track, which is Grade 1 is the absolute pinnacle, which is Formula 1 racing. Grade 2 is I think IndyCar, and so MotoGP, which is international, is the very top motorcycle racing in the world. They're going to race at Flat Rock, which is just 25, 30 minutes north of Spring City. Ooh. So I'm looking at that and I'm going, well, that's an opportunity, right? Like, they're very close to us. That's lodging, that's food, because where are people going to stay? This, if you're going to build a racetrack, it's by definition going to have to be kind of out on its own. You're not going to buy that kind of acreage in the middle.
Right next to a hotel.
Right.
So people are going to...
It's by definition kind of built out in a remote area. So I look at that and I go, we can tap into that.
Yeah.
We need to tap into that. That's going to be a 100-year investment. That's going to be something that's around for a long time. You look to the south in Hamilton County, and you have the old McDonald Farm property, which is topic of a lot of conversation. I think eventually that will become some sort of industrial park. That is it's in Hamilton County, but in a lot of ways, it's more Ray County than Hamilton County. In some ways,
well, a lot of it is in Ray County.
A lot of it is in Ray County.
Yeah, because Hamilton. My understanding is Hamilton County bought property in Ray County
because the tract, I think, does bleed over into our side. So you look at that and you go, well, we have to make sure that we capitalize on that. Yeah. Because here's the thing, and so how's all that? So that's kind of all tourism and then industrial development. And then I think, like Nate Lorenzen, most people know the tulip farm. So what Nate Lorenzen is doing, like, how do we come alongside a guy like Nate, and he's building a tourist destination? People travel. I haven't seen the data. I would love to see the data, but people will travel to see something like that. Yeah. So how do we support that and come alongside it and make sure that I want to capture that data, number one, but we want those people to eat. Don't eat at home and then drive to Nate's farm. Drive to Dayton, stop and eat, stop and shop, then go to the farm, then go home. Yeah. Just across the Tennessee River, Greg Vidal is selling the land to build the National Cemetery. So the Chattanooga National Cemetery, which is off of McCauley, it's filling up. Oh. And so the national parks, I think that's under the national parks, and they said, hey, we need to expand, but we have no more land. Oh, wow. And so Greg, he's a phenomenal guy, and he's done so much good work in conservation. He bought a lot of that farm, or a lot of that land that was going to be the Rarity Bay housing development that went under in 2008. Oh. So he bought it, and he turned it kind of back into farm. He conserved the natural look of that land. And he was able to secure that the National Cemetery would its expansion would be right there, overlooking the Tennessee River. It's adjacent to Ray County.
Wow.
So how do we make sure that, obviously that's sensitive. These people they're burying loved ones. They're coming back to visit loved ones. However, they're going to need to eat. They're going to need to get gas.
Well, it's hospitality.
It's hospitality. So how do we make sure that we are ready when that happens, and that we've thought through what that looks like for us? So those are all, in my mind, those are potential energy sources that we have to know that the opportunity is there and that we're ready to strike when it does.
Yeah, I want to throw a few in there. You covered it, but sub points with the hiking and stuff like that.
Yeah,
rock climbing is becoming pretty popular in this area.
Yep.
You've got the Cumberland Trail.
Yep.
That they're trying to expand and connect and do all kinds of really cool stuff with. But a lot of people like to do rock climbing on that. I think it would be interesting to see. It's hard to compete with like the Ocoee, but whitewater kayaking is something that I'm starting to research a lot for myself. Like I want to get into it. Yep. And I was hiking the Brayton Mountain Trail.
Yeah.
Or the what is it? Roaring Creek Trailhead in Graysville. Yep. And it was after some of the rain, and it was like beautiful. And really kind of swole up a little bit. And I was like, I want to go kayaking on this. Yep. This looks amazing. So whitewater kayaking and rock climbing, I think, are some subsets where it's just amazing. And I think that they're really unrealized gems so far.
And you mentioned Ocoee, which is like an hour away from here. But let's say you live in Nashville and you're going to the Ocoee. Well, what do we know? What do we know about people who like water sport or rafting? Well, we know that they would probably be interested in some of these other things. Right. So, like, why could we not capture some of that?
Yeah.
Another important thing I want to say before we get too carried away, when we talk about, I think we're really in an interesting spot as a community. I think most small towns, a lot of small communities, they have the people, they have the houses, they don't have the jobs, right? So they have the places to live, but they don't have the things to do. I think we are in a really peculiar spot as a community because I think we have the things to do.
Yes.
We don't have the places to live. And so this is an interesting dilemma because if we've done such a good job, I think, making sure that we have good jobs for people to be in, that we've attracted people, and who could have known what was going to happen with the pandemic? But now I think it needs to be a priority. It's imperative that we make sure that we have the infrastructure to develop the housing resources that we're going to have if we expect folks to come here, work here, and live here. Yeah. What we do not want, very selfishly, I'm going to say this transparently, selfishly, I don't want you to come get a really good job in Ray County and then live in Sale Creek. Right? I don't want you, selfishly, I don't, now, you know what I'm saying? Like, very selfishly, like, that's not what I want.
Yeah.
I want you to live here.
Yeah.
And in order for that to happen, and I think our leadership at every level recognizes this, and they're working on it, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. And that's part of what I see as a high priority is going to the state and finding the grant resources and finding the money, but also just thinking creatively and saying, maybe the way we developed housing up until now is not the way we develop it going forward. Maybe I don't know that. I'm just I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think I'm very open to creatively solving this problem.
It's definitely a bottleneck. It's a choke point.
It's a choke point. And what we really want to capture households. We really want to make sure that when people come here, that they live here and that they're contributing at every level from a tax perspective. That said, my dream, talk about my personal vision, this is just my dream.
Let's hear it.
I would love to see more housing downtown. So when you think about what people need, your downtowns almost always provide those things. It has sewer, it has water, they have sidewalks, they have transportation, they have schools within walking distance.
I've got an idea on how to accomplish this.
Okay,
so
I'm excited about And it may be, it may be something that we study and say, well, that's not feasible, and there's a reason we haven't done it. But I also think that it could just be that that there's I think younger Americans are really, I think that the like 40 acres and a mule, I think I think that's not necessarily what younger Americans want anymore. I don't think land ownership is the American dream that it used to be. It is still a dream. Don't get me wrong. If I had, all the money, I would buy a farm and I would live in the middle of it. But I think increasingly a lot of younger people, they don't care. They care more about having a cool place to live in a convenient part of town where, they don't necessarily need to own a car. They would love to walk, or like one wheel. We have a mutual friend. If you could one wheel everywhere you go, you could ride a bicycle. So I think it's really interesting to think about what could, and Dayton had people living downtown 100 years ago, 150 years ago. So like, what could that look like? And that also does not create as much strain on your highways, on your roads.
One easy solution.
Okay.
You ready? All the commercial space downtown, all the commercial buildings downtown are zoned residential on the second floor. All of the first floor,
right?
Not allowed.
Mixed use space.
Well, it's just commercial.
Yep.
It's just commercial, non-residential.
Yep.
They do that so that you kind of force, you leverage that so that your downtown spaces on the first floor become restaurants, commerce, everything like that, commercial.
Yep.
Well, it's not particularly viable at this moment. So there's a lot of empty commercial space downtown.
Yep.
But there's high demand for residential downtown. Mm-hmm. What I think should happen, and this is a compromise, just make it all residential. I understand that doesn't jive. Right. Here's what you do. Create a setback permitting where you say, okay, we get it. We want commerce in the front portion. What if you did half and half, or 1/3 and a half? The 1/3 or the half of the street-facing portion of the first floor of the building is still zoned commercial, but the back half can be zoned residential.
Yep.
That would be so huge. You know how much square footage of residential space that would suddenly free up for you to put in apartments downtown?
Right.
I think that would be huge.
Yeah.
So that's one.
I have two thoughts on it. First, I love the idea. Mm-hmm. I would remind people. So I know that a lot of people will hear that and they'll go, "Oh no, that's worse. That's terrible. I hate that idea." I would remind people that pre-industrial revolution, pre-wage earning society, what would happen is Justice the bread maker would have a shop downtown. The first floor would be your bread shop, and you would live above the bread shop. Next to you would be Alex the shoemaker, and the first floor would be my shop. The second floor would be where I lived. Mm-hmm. So this is really the way a lot of downtowns
were. Old school.
It's old. It's a return to the way things really used to exist. And if you go to New York City, it's still the way most big cities function. Mm-hmm. You have commercial space on the first floor. So in a town like this, I would argue this is not a new idea. Like, this isn't something I've come up with. This is just the way it used to be.
Well, it is already the way for the second floor and above.
It is, right. So you talked about zoning. And so, side note, parking is always going to be the bugaboo for this solution. And I recognize that. So parking is always the problem.
That could be included in
always the problem.
In the stipulation.
Right.
There have to be so and so many, because some spots, that's going to be a big issue. Yep. Other spots, there are public lots nearby that are like very available, or they have the spots available on site. A lot of them do.
Yep.
Some of them, that would become an issue.
So zoning is an interesting thing, and I by no means want to go down the road of proposing anything, because zoning is a very sensitive subject. I come from a family of builders, so builders have very strong feelings about zoning for legitimate reasons. All that to say, I'm going to throw out something. But when I was at the Times Free Press, the city of Chattanooga in the downtown district adopted a completely new zone, a completely new set of zoning laws, and they called it form-based zoning. The idea was that traditionally, almost every city kind of has the same zoning guidelines. It's like R1, R2, R3, C1, C2, C3, I1, I2, I3, right? So residential, commercial, industrial. And you alluded to this, talking about zoning for maybe residential in the front, and then commercial or R3, whatever.
Commercial in the front.
Commercial front, yeah, right.
Residential.
So Chattanooga again, going back to it looked at downtown and it said, okay, we have some real problems because the way people want to live is changing. More young people want to live in a downtown. Mm-hmm. They don't really care that they're living above like Buffalo Wild Wings or whatever. Mm-hmm. They want that.
Yeah.
So they adopted, and I'm not proposing this. I'm not for it or against it. I'm throwing it out as an idea, but they adopted form-based code. So they said, instead of looking at a parcel as being residential, commercial, or industrial, we look at it from a form perspective. Meaning, does this fit the form of the neighborhood? So it is less concerned with what's happening inside the building. It's more concerned with does how that building interacts with its neighborhood fit or not. It's more concerned with if you have a street with tree-lined sidewalks, you cannot come in and build something and not put a tree, not put the landscaping out front. Mm-hmm. It's more concerned with creating form and creating people-friendly space and creating the kind of spaces. So you can design that and say, what kind of space do we want this to be? And then you can say, well, here's what the form is now. So again, tree-lined sidewalks or, setbacks. And again, it doesn't matter as much if you're running a candy shop on the first floor, or if you're running studio apartments on the first floor. It matters whether that is disturbing
the people around you,
the existing identity of the neighborhood.
It's like the flow of the neighborhood.
It's the flow of the neighborhood.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I've not revisited it to know if they have called that a success or not. It was super controversial, but it's an interesting idea,
right? And in that way, I think that this compromise would be appropriate because you maintain smaller commercial space in the front.
Yep.
And honestly, for the people who are like, we need to keep those as commercial. That's like, it needs to be retail. It needs to be restaurants.
Right.
My argument would be, this is how you actually accomplish that long term.
Sure.
Because you actually bring foot traffic in and will eventually grow.
Services will always go where people live.
Exactly.
Always.
So if you want more restaurants downtown, you need more people living downtown.
We've got to have more people. People working 9 to 5 downtown is phenomenal. But if I own a restaurant, I don't know if I can sustain. And so Monkey Town's great. I'm not talking about, obviously people are doing it. And if you build something that, people will drive into downtown for, that's obviously not what we're talking about. But you know what I'm saying. Like if you want a real robust, if you don't want the lights to be turned off at 6 p.m., then you can't have everyone packing up and going home. And that's what's happening in a lot of cases. Yeah. And maybe people don't want that. And if they want it to be like this, I think you have to say, okay, fine. Then that's the design. I don't care if that's the design. I just care that it's the default, right? So if that's the design, we can back into it. But what I fear is that we do things out of default and that we wind up with something that maybe we don't love.
My argument is that that's currently the case with commercial spaces downtown.
Could be.
Is that it's a zoning default, and you drive down and there's so many empty spaces. It's like, listen, what was the case, what was a good decision at a certain time, has wrought something that doesn't seem to be functioning at a high level of efficiency.
I think it's at least a question to ask. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's at least a question to ask. So, I'm excited about that, man. I think in terms of vision casting. And the same, you could talk about that in Spring City too. Spring City has one of the most picturesque, roads, like downtowns that you'll ever see. They're on Front Street. It's beautiful. And you have the depot, you have the train passing through there. I mean, it's a postcard. So, I'll tell you this. Like, the reason I'm doing this is because I love our community deeply. I care about our community deeply. I do not, for 1 second, believe I have all the answers. I would be terrified if I thought I had the answers. I have the questions. I have the curiosity, and I have the motivation to do something about it. What I'm not willing to do is sit on my hands and complain about the town I live in when I have not done anything about it, or when I have not raised my hand and said, I will go to the well and dip water out and bring it back. So that would be my sales pitch is, I don't claim to have all the answers. But I do know for a fact that, no one cares more than I do. I have a little girl who I want to see grow up and stay in this community. And if that's what we want, if you want your kids to stay here, we have to build something. You and I have to build the thing and then hand it to them. It will not happen on its own. Yeah. And to me, that's the why. That's the passion. And we'll get some stuff wrong. Everyone's going to get some stuff wrong. Believe me. Like I'm not going to be right all the time. That's my wife. So I invite the questions. Yeah. I invite the conversations. I invite the communication. This town belongs to you as much as it does to me. You're raising a family here just like I am. It belongs to people who live in this county, this shape, as much as it belongs to me. It doesn't belong to anybody more than it does to everybody. And that's a really important thing to remember. You do not have to be executive director of RETC to have an opinion on what kind of town we should live in. You don't have to be the mayor to have an opinion on what kind of town we should live in. Yeah. Everyone is entitled to their way of thinking. Everyone's entitled to have a vision. In fact, I would love to see more people have a vision for this town. I would love to see more people feel ownership of building a future.
That was a long one.
Was it good though?